Good afternoon, and welcome to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. My name is Gregg, and today is Tuesday, September 20th, 2005. We're broadcasting live from 2 to 3 in the afternoon, Pacific Daylight Time, and that's the time when, since the program is live, you can participate in it, assuming you're listening at the time of the live broadcast. I have to say that because the broadcast is re-aired later in the day in some locations, and of course it's on the internet where you could hear it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the live broadcast is Tuesday, September 20th, and 2 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific Daylight Time. And we have people calling from all time zones, so they must be able to make those calculations. If you'd like to be on the program today, the purpose is to discuss things of God, the things of the Bible, things of Christianity. If you have a question about any related topic to those general categories, or if you have a point of difference with the host that you'd like to talk about, feel free to do that. You're always welcome to do so at our dime. The number to call is 1-800-438-5090. We've got a couple of our lines already occupied with callers from before we went on the air, but we do have a line open for you at 1-800-438-5090. And I want to announce also that we are going to be having a talk in the Santa Cruz area in a home. If you're interested in that, it's Thursday night, September 22nd. And if you want directions there, you can call this number. You'll reach either Richard or Ruth. If you call this number, they'll give directions to the meeting tomorrow night. I'm sorry, not tomorrow night. It's Thursday night, the 22nd of September. That number to call would be area code 831-475-4003. Now, if you didn't get that number, you can get it from our website. All the numbers I give over the air are available on our website as well. The website is www.thenarrowpath.com. And that meeting is Thursday night in the Santa Cruz area, Santa Cruz, California, that is, which is my fair city where I live right now. All right, let's talk to Clyde, who's calling from the area I used to live in, Portland, Oregon. Clyde, welcome to the program.
Steve?
Hello, Clyde.
Hi. Steve, I have a question regarding a study Bible. I'm kind of in the market for a new study Bible, and the one that I have now is a New King James Version.
Uh-huh.
Done by it has a dispensational bent to it.
As most of them do.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I don't know if you're familiar with the Reformation Study Bible. Have you had any occasion to take a look at that or be aware of
the Reformation Study Bible, not the Geneva Study Bible?
Which I think it was called that originally, and then they changed the name to the Reformation Study Bible. The general editor is R.C. Sproul.
Yeah.
And I know he's a non-dispensationalist, and I was just wondering if you had any familiarity with that and whether the study notes in that would, well, the ones that are dispensational, I mean, they're valuable, but it just, when you come across things dealing with end times and eschatology, they, of course, have that interpretation.
Right. Well, I don't generally recommend study Bibles, and I don't use one.
Yeah,
because I'd rather read the Bible separately from the commentaries, whereas study Bibles mix the commentary in with the Bible itself. And I'd rather read more thorough treatments. If I want commentary, I'd rather read something that may treat all sides of the subject. And you don't find that very often in a study Bible. Right. Now, if you do benefit from a study Bible, there are certain things that may matter to you more than to somebody else. Now, the Geneva or the Reformation Study Bible is obviously going to be strongly Calvinistic, and therefore, when you come to the passages that are relevant to Calvinism, they're going to give notes that are that support the Calvinist view. Now, that's not a problem. I mean, A, if you're a Calvinist, or B, if you're not a Calvinist and you're very well acquainted with the material, and you're not going to be taken in by notes that you would maybe otherwise disagree with. But that's true also of the eschatology thing. So you're right, the Reformation Study Bible is not going to be dispensational, and that's refreshing in a study Bible. So if the eschatological passages are the ones that you most want to have notes readily available for, then I guess you're going to probably, and you don't want dispensational eschatology, then I'd say going with the Reformation Study Bible would be a good choice. I think there are probably more passages that are eschatological in the Bible than there are that are specific proof texts for Calvinism.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, if you get the Reformation Study Bible, you'll probably benefit more because, Clyde, I don't even know if you're a Calvinist or not, but if you're not...
I've been on the fence, I guess, Steve.
Okay, yeah, so if you're not, then you'll just have to endure, Calvinist notes on a few passages, maybe a couple dozen passages. Whereas if you get a dispensational study Bible, you'll have to endure dispensational notes on probably scores, if not hundreds of passages.
Right.
So yeah, maybe the Reformation Bible would be better for you.
Yeah, by study Bible, I don't mean one of these that are very lengthy and go into a great deal of explanation.
Yeah.
Basically, those that just have a lot of footnotes and, really basic insights that have been developed over, a long period of time.
Right.
So that's kind of study Bible. I know there are study Bibles which are kind of have a commentary interspersed and really are very detailed, and that's not the kind I have in mind. So what I kind of benefit from is these general notes at the bottom of the page, which kind of illuminate the meaning of a word without having to get into a Greek dictionary or something like that. Which as I realize, I know you prefer the Reformation Study Bible, or it did originally came out. The second edition was in the New King James Version, and now the latest edition is in the English Standard Version. Have you got any? I know you like the New King James Version. Have you read the English Standard Version? Are you familiar with it?
I have not, and I'll tell you why. In the old days, when there weren't very many English versions on the market, I used to buy every one that was available and read through it. I started out with the King James. Then in the church I attended as a youth, they gave me a Revised Standard Award Bible once, so I read through that. And then when the Good News Bible came out, at least the New Testament version of it came out, I read through that. And then the New American Standard came out in 1971 or sometime like that, and I got that and read through it. And then the NIV came out. First the New Testament, then the Old, and I read through those. The Living Bible, I read parts of it probably, but when these different translations came out, they came out at far enough intervals I could actually read them all. But then they started putting out new English translations so quickly that I couldn't read them all, and I also discovered I didn't need to, because the New King James simply is an adequate translation. And there may be other translations that are adequate, but I don't want to keep changing my Bible. There's not going to be a perfect translation. If you want a perfect translation, you're going to have to pretty much get a Greek English interlinear New Testament and a Hebrew English interlinear Old Testament and check the original languages yourself. So if a person's not going to do that, and most people won't, then I'd say an adequate translation is the best you can hope for. And the New King James is a very adequate translation. So is the King James, by the way. And so is the New American Standard. And maybe some of the newer ones that I haven't read may also be very adequate. But who cares? I mean, they may put out 1,000 more adequate translations. Do I want to change my Bible every few years? How do you memorize anything?
Yeah, that does kind of throw you off. That's really a complication that way. Do you read the Christian Research Journal by any chance?
I know that they put out a series of articles on translations. I haven't had a chance to read those articles. I do subscribe.
Yeah, well, I was kind of looking through that. I have an issue, and I was a little dismayed that the author, who's James R. White, he thinks the New King James Version is a fine translation, but it's based on an inferior text.
That's because he doesn't believe that the Textus Receptus is the better text.
Yeah. So,
But see, that's still a matter of opinion, and you're going to have people who disagree with you no matter which text you use. The texts are not very different from each other.
Okay.
The King James and the New King James are both going to use. Now, by the way, this only affects the New Testament, not the Old.
Right.
But they both use the Textus Receptus, which is a very adequate text of the New Testament. And the modern translations tend to use the Alexandrian text, which is also an adequate text. the differences between them are minimal. And
he refers to something called the Nestle Aland platform.
That's the Alexandrian text. The Nestle Aland text is Nestle and Aland are editors who put together an eclectic text of the Alexandrian text type. Which anyway, it's kind of complex. You can buy books that will explain these textual issues to a layman who doesn't have much background in it, and it'll clear things up. But the bottom line is that the two different New Testament texts really don't teach anything different from each other. That is, I mean, the differences in them are minimal. There are a few words here and there different, but different doesn't mean contradictory. Okay. A lot of times the different words are simply equivalent words, or they may be that a word is left out that's in one text that's not in the other one, or a few words, or even a verse sometimes. Okay. And of course that raises questions about whether the manuscript that includes the words is closer to the original, or whether the manuscript that excludes them is. But in any case, that only matters to people who feel they have to have every word that Paul wrote and every word that Matthew and Luke wrote before them. I can see why some would want to do that, but it's going to be kind of impossible, right, because we don't have consensus among scholars as to which of those texts is better. But I've read both. I've read through the New Testament in many times in the Textus Receptus translations, and I've also read through the New Testament many times in the Alexandrian type Nestle Aland text New Testament translations, and the teachings are the same. Okay. The teachings are the same on every point.
Okay. Is R.C. Sproul? He's a non-dispensationalist, but he's also a Calvinist, right?
Well, yeah, and that's how most Reformed people are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. See, that's what.
Is he a millennialist?
He's all-millennial.
Oh, he's all-millennial.
Yeah, unless he's post-millennial. I think he's all. The Reformed theology is the theology of Luther and Calvin. Oh. And those men were both amillennial. Luther and Calvin were both amillennial and what we call Calvinistic. Okay. And so Reformed theology usually includes, well, it always includes Calvinism. Uh-huh. And then it also includes either amillennialism or postmillennialism as an eschatological framework.
Okay. Well, Steve, that helps a lot. I'll give it some more thought and maybe go browse in a bookstore and make a decision on that. But that's very helpful.
Okay, thanks, Clyde.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Bye, Steve.
Bye-bye. Let's talk next to Ryan, who's calling us from College Station, Texas. Ryan, I saw you were on our switchboard yesterday and couldn't stay. Welcome back.
Yeah, couldn't stay at work, but I got a few minutes today. But how's it going with you?
Good. How's it with you?
Oh, it's okay. We're a little bit gearing up for possible another hurricane down here.
I know.
May come up down to Houston, and we're about 90 miles north of Houston, so we'll just pray that we're, well, not just that we're okay, but that we could, discern what the Lord's will is for us, right, what He might be speaking through us, especially. So that's the main thing. But I called for a quick question, maybe one you don't receive a lot. But I see, various pictures of yourself with a guitar. And I was interested to know, have you led worship in various degrees in your life?
Yes.
I mean, for I guess maybe church services or group gatherings, you seem to have led worship at various times.
Well, I was in the Jesus movement, I led worship at almost all the meetings where I also taught in homes and coffee houses. But I moved to Santa Cruz originally in 1970. The second time I moved to Santa Cruz, I moved in 1980. Because I was invited to move here and become the worship leader at Calvary Chapel of Santa Cruz. So I was, for about 3 years, Calvary Chapel's worship leader in Santa Cruz, California. And then when I, moved to Oregon and started the Great Commission School, we had public meetings. I led the worship there on Friday nights for years.
Okay, that's good.
16 years.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm just really fascinated with various worship leaders. I mean, I really admire and look up to men like Keith Green, Jason Upton, even a lot of different guys locally. But I was just interested to hear if you had any kind of general thoughts or, I guess, brief thoughts on leading worship. I mean, it's kind of a different dynamic than just the subject of worship itself, although it shouldn't be necessarily, because one is really just worshiping the Lord, whether He's in front or, not. But as someone that obviously had experience there, I didn't know if you had any insights of how a worship leader is to really worship the Lord, but yet keep man in mind in the sense that he's leading them, quote unquote, into worship, and how he goes about doing that without kind of pleasing man, but also trying to really draw near to the Lord and worship him and focus on him. And I don't know, it's kind of broad, I know, I apologize, but I thought maybe you'd have a few thoughts on just kind of who you looked up to, or maybe some thoughts there.
Well, Keith Green was a friend of mine, but I didn't think of him primarily as a worship leader. I loved his, ministry tunes that he performed, and I loved him as a man. I know he did lead worship sometimes, and actually I didn't enjoy his worship leading as much as I enjoyed his performances. But like everyone else, of course I have opinions about worship and worship leading. Everyone has opinions, and I'm the world's greatest authority on my own opinion. But there's actually nothing in the Bible on the subject of worship leading. We have the example of Miriam leading the women in worship in Exodus chapter 15, but it hardly becomes a standard for Christian church services. I have opinions, and my opinion is not sacrosanct. I mean, some people would have other things they think, and maybe their views are as good as mine. I know most people prefer whatever style of worship they were first acquainted with in the early days of their Christian life. I know I do, and for that reason, my worship style and my worship leader style is sort of a Calvary Chapel style, because I first became a worship leader when I was a teenager in Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and I didn't lead the worship at the church there, but I was attending that church when I was leading worship other places, so I was very much influenced by that. But for example, there's a lot of changes have occurred in modern worship leading, and not the least of which is that it's almost all the churches I ever visit have bands, full bands leading worship. Now, I played in a band for years, but it wasn't a worship leading band. It was an evangelistic band, and we played only or almost entirely in places where unbelievers gathered, in college campuses, city parks, coffee houses, and things like that. We didn't lead church services because our band's ministry is evangelistic. At the Calvary Chapels that I was at, certainly Chuck Smith's church, the worship was a cappella for the most part, and sometimes there was a guitar player, but the band era came later on, and I don't mind the band, but it becomes more and more of a performance, whether we want it to be or not. I mean, the band leader and the band performers may be very humble people and not interested in drawing attention away from Christ, but it's kind of hard in our culture for there to be a band playing up front and for the worshipers to not be paying close attention to the band, because concerts and music as entertainment is so much a part of the youth culture. And so it's very hard to be in a church with a band playing and feel like I'm being led into worship. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like the band. Last Sunday, I attended a church that had beautiful worship music and a very professional band, and I just loved the music, but I didn't feel like I was worshiping. I felt like I was listening to a concert. Because of the amplified sound and stuff, I couldn't hear any of the congregation singing. They were all singing, I imagine, but I couldn't hear them over the speakers. And so I felt like I might as well be in a concert, which isn't a negative thing. I like, it would have been a very edifying concert. I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying that I didn't feel like I was worshiping with a congregation, even though I was singing. I couldn't hear myself nor anyone else. And I'm not saying it has to be the way I like it. Like I said, I have an opinion, but everyone else has other opinions. I think that I've always thought it would be a wonderful thing if the worship band was invisible, like they were in the back of a room behind the congregation or behind a partition or something like that. So you'd have nice music, and also that they were mindful of the fact that their amplifiers are very loud and that they should turn them down so that the congregation can actually hear their own voices singing once in a while. That way, if you can't hear your own voice, sometimes it's hard to feel like you're singing. You know you are because you're forcing air out your vocal cords, but you can't hear anything. I'd like for worship in a congregation to be more of a congregational activity, not just that everyone's doing it, but everyone can hear that they're doing it. And it's become more and more in the last couple decades a band performing, and if the music is good and the band is good, it can be a very edifying experience. It's just a different kind of experience for me. I'd rather sing with with a guitar or a piano or with or a cappella so that I can hear the congregation singing. Now, I know God can hear them over the amplifiers, but it's kind of a blessing to hear them myself. And it's, once again, no one has to believe the way I do about this. The Bible doesn't say what I just said. It's just my own thoughts. So you wonder if I had any thoughts, or you said insights. I don't know if what I have are insights. I have opinions, you know.
No, I appreciate those though. I mean, it's just it kind of arose just out of the little on-campus 20 and 30 somethings ministry that we have, and we're not always wanting to think that we've figured things out in ways that we should do things, and maybe because they've always been done a certain way, or we've always grown up knowing something. So we're always just interested to hear people's insights and fresh perspectives on how we might really be communally and authentically worshiping Christ. And we really want to do that out of sincerity, out of truth, and obviously that's a goal that only the Holy Spirit can help us go through, but I appreciate your advice on the matter.
Oh, thanks. I was invited to a Calvary Chapel to teach a worship seminar one weekend, and I did teach it, but I don't know if it was ever taped. It was years ago, I don't even think we have the lectures I gave anymore on tape, but I do have a lot of ideas. I do draw when I taught on worship, I draw principles from Scripture, but they are principles, not really examples, and not direct teachings. Because, again, the idea of a musician or musicians being in front of the congregation leading worship is, well, it's kind of extra-biblical. Now, which doesn't make it wrong. The Bible does say in 3 places in the New Testament that we should worship with psalms. And the word psalmos, the Greek word for psalm, means a poem to be accompanied by a stringed instrument. So there must have been musicians who played stringed instruments in the early church if they were singing the psalms. But whether those musicians were up in front or not, I don't know. And again, I can't find any biblical basis to criticize having the band up front. I just know that from my personal subjective experience, I would be able to focus on the Lord somewhat better if the band was more invisible.
Right, and that's what I was asking. I'll let you get to the other callers, but I do think it is interesting, like you said, that when I guess it's not the only, but in Ephesians 4 or 5, when it talks about be filled with the Spirit, he says that's in direct correlation with be filled with the Spirit, making melody in your heart with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. It's just an interesting kind of thing that the evidence that maybe was surrounding being filled with the Spirit was having a worshipful heart. And that's really spoken to me a lot. But anyway, thanks, Steve. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
Amen. God bless you, Ryan.
Take care, man.
Thanks for your call. Bye-bye. All right, you're listening to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. Both of our next 2 callers are named Mike. One is from Salinas, one from Santa Cruz, and we have a line open for you if you'd like to call, 1-800-438-5090. That's 1-800-438-5090. If you have a question about the Bible or about the Christian life or about ethics or theology or any of that stuff, or you disagree with the host and want to express a contrary viewpoint, feel free to call 1-800-438-5090. Mike from Salinas, you're first. You're next.
Hello, Steve.
Welcome. Hi, welcome to the program.
I enjoy your program.
Thank you.
I had a question about evolution and Christianity. I'm basically a new believer from about 2 years ago, and met a person who kind of believes in both, and I kind of thought before that they kind of contradict each other.
That Christianity and evolution contradict each other?
Yes. The
yes,
theory of evolution. I just kind of wanted to get your view on that, and
sure.
Basically just take it off the air. I've been kind of waiting on the phone for a while, so
all right.
I'm listening to you while I'm working here, so I'd like to just get your view on that. I'm a little bit confused on the theory of evolution and Christianity.
Okay, well, I'm glad you called, brother.
Thank you.
God bless you. Bye-bye. Well, there's a lot of resources available in print and on tape and on the internet and so forth that are Christian critiques of the theory of evolution, because the theory of evolution does have certain presuppositions that are contrary to what the Bible teaches in general. Now, of course, what the Bible teaches, if you've read any part of it, you probably have read the first chapter. Genesis chapter 1 teaches that God created everything by speaking them into existence. It indicates that on the first day he created light, and on the second day he created the atmosphere of the earth. On the third day he created dry land and plants. On the fourth day he created the sun and the moon and possibly the stars. On the fifth day, he created the animals that live in the water and the animals that fly through the air. And then on the sixth day, he created terrestrial or land animals as well as humans. So the indication as you read that is that God simply said, let there be such and such, and it came into existence. And it does not appear at all that the things that were created on the later days were developed out of things that were created on the earlier days. That is, he seems to have spoken things into existence out of nothing, rather than simply taking an early living thing and modifying it or evolving it into higher living things. It appears that he created each thing individually and in a very short period of time. Now, the period of time is hard to nail down. I personally believe that Genesis 1 is literal, and therefore I take it to be 6 ordinary days of 24 hours each. But there are some people who feel that the passage can be interpreted differently to allow it to take more time. But the impression that we get, certainly reading Genesis, is very contrary to the impression we get from the theory of evolution. Now, most evolutionists don't believe that God had anything to do with evolution. Now, there are some who do. There are people who are called theistic evolutionists, and they believe that God is the creator, but that he used the processes of evolution to bring about the variety of living things in the plant and animal kingdoms. But most evolutionists are not Christians and don't believe the Bible at all, and are either atheists or agnostics. They don't believe necessarily in God and don't believe that God had anything to do with it. The theory of evolution, as it is taught by most, certainly most of the experts or in science, is a theory that is naturalistic, which means that nature did everything. There's no supernatural creation by someone like God, but nature did it all. Originally, before there was anything that we see around us in the universe, there was simply matter and energy in some very simple form, in a cosmic egg that blew up. And in the Big Bang, it hurled its atoms in every direction, which eventually reorganized into solar systems. And upon at least one of the planets in our solar system, eventually some simple components managed to very fortuitously combine themselves in just the right arrangements to create protein molecules in large numbers, because it takes large numbers of protein molecules to make a living cell. And so these protein molecules were accidentally, is as good a way to put it as any, by forces of nature and coincidence, brought together into a living cell. Now, how this thing became a living cell is not easily explained, because you can put all the ingredients of a living cell into a beaker and stir it up, and you don't have anything alive. You just have a mixture of ingredients. How something becomes alive from a non-living thing has never been explained, and I believe cannot be explained, because I don't think anything comes to life from dead originals without life. Life has to beget life. But that's contrary to the evolutionary view. The evolutionary view basically is of spontaneous generation, which is that the first living cell or cells came from non-living things, non-living chemicals, and that this cell eventually had enough variety in its DNA to mutate and to create offspring of itself that were different in some ways than itself. And eventually these differences became a multitude of differences. Eventually a single cell gave rise, and no one can explain how, but gave rise to multicellular creatures. Now, by the way, many people don't realize how large a step this is. We know that cells divide, and an amoeba, for example, it reproduces by mitosis. It just divides into 2 amoebas, and those eventually will be 4 and 8 and so forth amoebas. And so sometimes people think, well, maybe once you have enough amoebas, maybe once you have enough cells, that's enough to have a multicellular creature. Well, there might be enough amoebas to make a multicellular creature, but you need more than a number of amoebas. You need different kinds of cells. See, an amoeba is a certain kind of a cell. It reproduces another amoeba, which is the same kind of a cell. And if you have 1 million amoebas, you still have 1 million of the same kind of cell. But for a multicellular creature, you need a variety of kinds of cells. Examples, for a fish, You need scale cells, you need blood cells, you need bone cells, you need brain cells, you need eye cells, you need all kinds of cells. For a human being, you need even more kinds of cells. Now, what evolutionists have never really been able to explain is how, first, they can't explain where the first cell came from, because chemicals mixed together don't make cells. At least no one has ever found it to be so. And yet they call it science, although no one's ever observed it, but they insist that it happened. And then this cell, by reproducing itself many, many times, somehow was able to come up with a multicellular creature, which is an amazing thing, because every single-celled creature is a complete organism. They don't need to develop into a multicellular creature. An amoeba does all the functions, and a paramecium and all the single-celled organisms are complete organisms. They take in nutrition, they reproduce, they give off waste, they move, they do all the things that basic animals do. And they do it without having more than one cell. They don't need to develop into multicellular creatures. But someone said they did. Darwin said they did. And I guess enough naive people have just felt like he knew what he's talking about, though he's never seen it happen either. No one's ever seen this happen. But allegedly, a single-celled creature somehow gave rise to a multicellular creature. So a creature that had the DNA of, let us say, an amoeba, somehow managed to create multi-cells, skin cells and blood cells and brain cells and bone cells out of a single kind of cell. No one can explain how this ever happened. And it's supposed to be science, but it certainly goes against anything we know of science. Science doesn't indicate that that can ever happen. But evolution is a fake science. It has the credibility that comes with the opinion of many scientists saying, we think this happened. But real science is observational. Real science begins with seeing something, seeing a process take place, and extrapolating from that observation that there is some law that makes such processes take place on a regular basis, and that they can predictably be anticipated to take place under certain conditions. That's what science is. And, of course, anytime you haven't observed something, you have philosophy rather than science. Now, Christianity doesn't claim to be science, because no one claims necessarily they've seen God. Now, the Bible does indicate that God has appeared to people in the ancient past, but they didn't claim it was science even then. It was a one-time deal. We're not talking about nature. We're not talking about natural processes where you could predictably say, okay, if you do this, you'll see God. God is an invisible being, and therefore Christianity claims to be a religious philosophy in many of its aspects. And that's what evolution is also. Evolution is also a religious philosophy. It just masquerades as a science. Now, it happens to be a religious philosophy that's contrary to the religious philosophy of Christianity. And, even though most scientists prefer to believe in evolution, you'll find that those that are very determined to believe in evolution usually have an agenda other than scientific. That is, they are very strongly opposed to religion or to the belief in God. Darwin was. Darwin said if Christianity was true, then his father was in hell, and that's why he rejected Christianity. Well, I mean, it's a strange reason to reject something because you don't like its implications. The truth can be painful, but it can still be the truth. But Darwin admitted in a letter to a friend that the reason he rejected Christianity is because if it was true, then his father is in hell and he couldn't bear to believe a doctrine like that. Well, frankly, suppose it was true. Suppose there was a hell, and suppose Darwin's father indeed was there. Is that a good reason to go there too? Because you reject the truth? I don't think so. It's a sad thing, indeed, to think that anyone you know and love has gone to hell. But that's not a very good reason for rejecting something's truthfulness. Christianity, unlike evolution, can be in some ways verified. Evolution has never been verified, frankly, because it never happened on a grand scale. But Christianity did happen. Jesus did live. He's historically verifiable. He did die on the cross, and he did rise from the dead, and many witnesses left a record of that who saw him. And so, that's as verifiable as any historic event is from eyewitness testimony. But evolution has never been witnessed. No one's ever seen that. So if you've got two religious philosophies in conflict, one is Christianity, the other being evolution, and one of them has a verifiable historic basis and the other does not, I frankly think that that Christianity is the more credible of the two religious ideas. But some people don't like Christianity because it has moral implications. If Christianity is true, then their fornication and their drunkenness and their adultery and their divorcing their spouses are all actions that God disapproves of and will judge. And they don't want to be judged. So it's easier for them to buy even a ridiculous and unthinkable theory that is unthinkable by anyone who's objectively looking at the scientific evidence. It's easier to adopt a philosophy that is non-judgmental of their lifestyle. And I believe that those who are the strongest opponents of creation are opposing it strongly because of their lifestyle, not because of any evidence. Because there is no evidence against creation, and there's really no compelling evidence for evolution. Now, I want to clarify one thing before someone thinks I'm being irresponsible here. When I say there's no compelling evidence for evolution, I need to clarify what we mean by evolution. Evolution is used two different ways. Some people will talk about varieties and development and adaptations in a species, and they'll call that evolution. So that, if an organism develops an immunity to a virus or a germ, well, then that's an evolutionary thing that's happened. It's adapted to something. If a species adapts to a new environment, then that's an adaptation. It's not what we're really talking about when we talk about the theory of evolution. It's actually just adaptation. Now, we can call that microevolution if we want to, but if we do, we're talking about something that no one has ever doubted. Christianity has no axe to grind against microevolution. I mean, Christians and non-Christians alike have always known that you can get 200 varieties of dog from a single species, and many varieties of horse and cat and so forth from a single species. That's not what evolution is. Varieties within a species is not evolution. At least no one can prove that it's evolution. It's just variation and adaptation. But real evolution, that is the evolution that the theory of evolution is talking about, is macroevolution, which suggests that all living things, even the most complex, have developed from ancestors that were simpler, going all the way back to an original cell, and that goes back to non-living chemicals. And certainly there's no proof for that whatsoever. I mean, there's simply no one has observed any of those processes of evolution ever occur. They can't be made to occur artificially in a laboratory. They can't be observed in nature. And there's really no reason to believe they ever did occur because, and I'll have to lay off on this because we have to go on to another call, but this is my last point. There's no reason to believe that evolution ever did occur of the grand scale type, because if it had, the fossil record would preserve fossils of a multitude of creatures that were evolutionary intermediates between species. If a fish evolved into a salamander, then there had to be many generations of creatures that were between fish and salamander to get there. And that means that there'd be creatures, for example, who have fins that were kind of not quite fully fins, but they're kind of becoming little legs. And you'd find the development at every stage, every imaginable morph stage, between a fin and a leg, and between a gill and a lung, and between a scaled skin and a bumpy skin that doesn't have scales. I mean, these are some of the changes that would have to take place. There would be others too. But, I mean, you'd have to find intermediates in order to document that any such transition ever occurred, and there are no intermediates. And the same thing is true not just there, but between every major animal group. If birds evolved from reptiles, as the evolutionists believe, or if whales evolved from land mammals, as they believe, then where are the intermediates? Where are the creatures that have part of a leg and part of a bird's wing? Where are the creatures that have 4 legs, but they're developing into a creature with a fish tail like a whale has? I mean, a paddle tail, and no legs at all. Now, it's not just that you need to find a missing link between these groups. There had to have been thousands of missing links if Darwinism is true. Darwin taught that these changes between species were extremely gradual in very, very tiny increments. And that means that over millions of years, there would have been gazillions of these intermediate forms that were on their way to becoming the fully formed and developed species that we see around us today. And what's interesting is that if nature caused evolution to happen, it's strange that we don't see any real evidence that it's happening now. We see fully isolated species that do vary within the species that they are in, but they don't seem to be developing new, apertures and limbs and so forth that their ancestors didn't have, which is what you'd have to see happening a lot if evolution occurred and was occurring. So, frankly, unless somebody has a brief they're carrying for atheism, there's not any reason at all to believe in evolution, because there's no evidence that it happened. In fact, the evidence is that it didn't. You can look in the fossil record and see that the transitional forms are conspicuous by their absence. They're not there, and therefore there's reason to believe they never existed. There certainly is no reason to believe they did exist. And if someone thinks there was, I'd be interested in hearing what they think that reason is. But anyway, Mike, I appreciate your call, and I've gone on with it longer than I might have, but you said you're a new Christian, and certainly the subject you raised is a rather large one. How does Christianity square with evolution? I think the two are fairly mutually exclusive. Okay, we're going to go to the phones again and talk to Mike from Santa Cruz, California. We have enough time. If you'd like to be on, we've got lines open for you at 1-800-438-5090. Evolution comes up from time to time on this program, obviously, always from my point of view. I always welcome people who disagree to call. And if we have evolutionists out there who think there's some good reason to believe in evolution, I'd be glad to hear what it is. I've studied it out pretty well for the past 40 years myself, and I've never seen any reason to believe in evolution. I'd like to know why you do, if you do. So give me a call, 1-800-438-5090. Mike from Santa Cruz, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, hi, Steve. Yesterday, Jim called in asking about information that might be useful for him to share with his friend. Remember that call? And I got a couple things for him. If he's listening, he could write down these titles. They're just a couple of small books, easy to read, and I think very useful. Just trying to give him a chance to grab a pen real quick. But the first one is by Ravi Zacharias. You may know of it. The title is The Lotus and the Cross.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, subtitled Jesus Talks with Buddha. And it's just it's a fictional work proposing a conversation between Jesus and Buddha, which of course never could have happened because they lived some 560 years apart or so. But it's interesting nonetheless, and presents the differing views and approaches to the cosmos and life. So again, the title, Jim, The Lotus and the Cross by Ravi Zacharias. And the other one's just a small book, easy to get through. It's called So What's the Difference? By
Fritz Radnauer.
Yeah, that's it. And it's a real interesting book comparing Buddhism, Mormonism, Unitarianism, Catholicism, and on for about, 10 or 12 different isms. And the section on Buddhism is only about 10 pages, but it's very much to the point, very easy to read, very quick to get through, and could be very perfect for his friend. And I will even bring these on Thursday night in case he wants to borrow them, or I'm sure he could get them on Amazon or something like that. So again, the title of the second one, So What's the Difference by Radnauer. And that's it.
Hey, I appreciate it, Mike, and I look forward to seeing you.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
God bless you. Yeah, Jim will probably be there. Bye-bye. Yeah, Fritz Radnauer is, I don't know if he's still living. I had lunch with him when I was about 17 years old once. The guy who wrote So What's the Difference, because back years ago when I was at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, I drew a Christian comic book, which was published, at Chuck Smith's expense. Chuck Smith put up the money for it, but it was actually manufactured by Gospel Light Publishing, where Fritz Radnauer worked, and I got a chance to meet with him for lunch to discuss the comic book at the time. And I remember his book. Before I met him, I'd read that book, and it's a helpful little book, and it's still around. So What's the Difference by Fritz Radnauer. Okay, Mike, that's, I'm sure, very helpful. Well, for the first time since the program began, our lines have emptied. We have probably 7-8 minutes left. That's probably enough for another call. If you want to give in, you can call to just have the last word on the program. You can either ask a question, of course, or you can call to state an opinion. If it's different than that of the host, you don't need to state the same opinion I've stated. We've already done that. But if you have a difference of opinion, you can always call here and tell us why. Once again, I always welcome evolutionists to call, or anyone who disagrees with Christianity or with me on anything. The number is 1-800-438-5090. It's 1-800-438-5090. There's a question that was written into me here. It says, what is the biblical warrant for baptism of infants? The baptism of infants is a practice that goes back to very ancient times in the early church. I think the 2nd or 3rd century, very early. And the basis for doing so, that is usually defended by those denominations that still practice infant baptism, is that they see baptism as the Christians' equivalent of the Jews' circumcision. In other words, the Jews were to circumcise themselves as a mark that they belonged to God by covenant, under the terms of the Old Covenant. It was the mark of the covenant. And that baptism is what Christians do to indicate their involvement in God's covenant. And so they say that baptism in the New Testament is the counterpart of circumcision in the Old Testament. Now, since circumcision was administered to baby Jewish boys on the 8th day of their life, it's clear that being part of the covenant community for the Jew could begin at birth. In fact, a Jewish boy was born Jewish, obviously, and therefore born into the community of the covenant. And so they were circumcised. And the argument is, extrapolating from that we should do the same thing with our infants, and we should baptize them as infants because the Jews circumcised theirs. My thought is that the Bible doesn't teach infant baptism, and I don't think that the argument I just gave in favor of it really is convincing to me. I don't know that we could argue biblically that baptism is the New Testament counterpart of circumcision. As I read the New Testament, it seems like the New Testament counterpart of circumcision is the circumcision of the heart. It's mentioned many times in the New Testament as instead of circumcising our bodies, we circumcise our heart. So the New Testament doesn't place baptism in the believer's life in the same role as circumcision was for the Jew, but something else occupies that role. Baptism is a new and unique ordinance, and I don't think that we can decide what to do with baptism by looking at what was done with circumcision. It's entirely different. And as you read the New Testament, you don't really find any case of any Christians baptizing infants. And because of that, many of us do not believe in infant baptism, but some Christians do. The Reformed denominations, the Roman Catholic Church, and some of those old line denominations like the Methodists and so forth do believe in baptizing infants. But the more free, non-denominational or even evangelical denominations typically believe in what we call believer's baptism. That baptism is not administered to infants until they reach an age when they can actually become believers, because the Bible teaches whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. The believing comes first. We'll talk next to Bob from Eugene, Oregon, and he'll, as I say, be our last word of the day, probably. Hello, Bob. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you. I had some questions about your divorce and remarriage article that you have on the web, and I don't think we'll have enough time to get into it, but I guess one of the main things that I have a question. The church I go to have put a lot of weight in the pre-Nicene Code, pre-Nicene writers and early church writers.
And they allowed no divorce.
Yeah. But in a case where somebody is engaged in a divorce and then remarried to somebody else, they believe that, of course, their person's living in adultery. Now, in looking at your article, one of the first things I hit that I know I'm going to have a problem with when I talk to them about it is right off the bat you say the statement of this new emphasis. But isn't it the early church writers that forbade the remarriage of anybody that's been divorced? Is that
at the beginning of my article, I mentioned that there's lately a swing from the permissive ideas about divorce to a very non-permissive thing. I don't know the exact wording because I'm not looking at the article, and I wrote it some years ago. But I see a new emphasis on that. It's new in terms of recent history, but it's old. Lots of things that are getting a new publicity have been around for a long time. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the idea of no divorce and no remarriage is a very old idea. It goes back to the pre-Nicene fathers, and as do a number of things that I don't agree with. For example, the pre-Nicene fathers believed that if you sin after baptism, you're lost. And they believe that a person who committed fornication or murder or a few other things, idolatry, could never be saved, even if they did that after they were converted, that they could never be saved again. And I just don't see that as taught in Scripture, But and likewise, they were very strict on the divorce issue. And I think maybe one of the reasons they were is one of the same reasons that same teaching has become popular now, is that when society gets extremely permissive, pious Christians, dedicated Christians, tend to swing the other direction out of concern not to compromise. Because the early fathers lived in a pagan world where sexual promiscuity and drunkenness and lack of respect for life and marriage and so forth were pretty dominant in their culture, and they may have swung the other way simply to make sure that they don't fall into the traps of their culture. And I think that's why that same teaching has become popular again in recent times, because our culture has become way too permissive in sexual areas and in divorce. And I think that there's people saying, wait, we need to put the brakes on this and need to have a testimony for the sanctity of marriage. And so they've gone back to a less lenient position than even evangelicals have usually held, and much more like what they taught in the first few centuries after the apostles. But the apostles in Christ, I don't think, taught such a thing, in my opinion. I think when you read 1 Corinthians 7 and Matthew 5:32 and Matthew 19:9, you find that there are cases. Now, obviously, some people interpret those verses differently, and I'm not going to obviously have time to argue it right now, but I believe there are cases where divorce and marriage are permitted, though I think that most cases that occur are not those cases. I think the majority of cases of divorce and marriage are probably adultery. But Jesus said, if a man divorces his wife except for the cause of fornication, he causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries her commits adultery. And so I think that exception is there for a reason, and he stated it twice in Matthew.
Right, and that's some of the other questions I had for you. The 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 25 and 26. You imply that it's staying one thing, but
I'll tell you what. If you could call back tomorrow, if you call early, we can talk about this at length.
Okay. Right.
Okay, because it deserves more time than we can give it here. Thank you, Bob, for your call.
Bye-bye.
God bless you, brother. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another broadcast day. You've been listening to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. My name is Steve Gregg, and if you want to help us stay on the air, we pay radio bills. That's about our only expenses in this ministry, radio bills and phone bills. There's no staff that are paid. I don't receive any pay, and no one else gets any pay from here. But there is the cost of radio time that we buy, and telephone time, because we have this 800 number. Those costs run us thousands of dollars a month, and we get all of that income from listeners, and we don't have any sponsors. So if you'd like to become one of those who helps us to pay those bills, that's how we'll stay on the air. If you do, you can write to us at the Narrow Path, P.O. Box 3633. That's P.O. Box 3633, Santa Cruz, California. The zip code is 95063. Now, you can also get that address from our website. You can also make a donation if you want, using a credit or debit card from the website. Or you can just not make a donation at all and just take resources from our website. They're free. We don't have anything for sale there. But there are some valuable things there. The website is www.thenarrowpath.com. I'll be speaking in the Santa Cruz area Thursday night. There's a contact number also at the website, www.thenarrowpath.com. Thanks for joining us. Tune in again tomorrow, and we'll continue our discussion.